Welcome. We're in week 5, and this week I'm going to cover Surrealism, DaDa, and Pop Art. So let's just jump into this. Surrealism, which you can find on page 413 in your workbook. Um, the statement that describes Surrealism is sought to expand consciousness by transcending limits of rational thoughts. Um, that actually, this is perfect when you start looking at surrealist art because you're thinking, what's going on here? It's just crazy. And that was what the artists were trying to accomplish. They were trying to transcend the limits of rational thought. And one of the best ways that I show that is on page 414. If you look at that, Salvador Dali, The Persistence of Memory. Often you look at that little character at the front of the painting and you're like, what is that? Is it a blanket? Is it a dog? Is it a horse? Looks like it has eyelashes, and there's a clock melting over it. What is it? The very fact that you're trying to figure out what it is shows that you don't understand surrealism, because the surrealist artists were trying to create art that you wouldn't recognize, that you don't know what it was. Just like during this time, Sigmund Freud was developing a new science called psychology and trying to understand the subconscious. The artists during the surrealist time were trying to understand the subconscious and the thinking below what we're thinking, the unconscious. And so whenever you look at it, if you don't understand, that's good, because that means that you're awake or not dreaming or whatever it might be. Another thing that the surrealists did was they used juxtaposition. So they would put things next to each other that would brought different types of meaning. So, for instance, the way that, and I can't remember if I described this last week, the way that you would describe juxtaposition, or the definition of juxtaposition, you take one item that has meaning, another item that has meaning, put them together, and by those two being side by side together, it creates a third meaning. That's juxtaposition. And the surrealist artist would create these depth of meaning using juxtaposition. And sometimes it had no meaning. It was just odd and unusual. Artists of this time, if you look on the page of 414, John Moreau is an artist during this time. Max Ernst, page 413, has examples of an artist. Rene Magritte, the painting that's on page 415 of Magritte is not the one that you commonly see. The one that you usually see is the man standing like an apple in front of his face. But Magritte was an artist during this time. Merritt Oppenheimer. Actually, I don't think there is a picture in here. There's a nice one where, and it actually really does a nice job of talking about juxtaposition, where Oppenheimer created a sculpture where he took a teacup and put fur on it. You're like, okay, it looks odd, bit weird, but that'd be juxtaposition. So fur doesn't belong on a cup, but you put the two together and it creates this different idea. Surrealism. So this time they explored the unconscious mind, dreams, fantasies, and hallucinations. 1924, 1942. Let's keep moving. The next art period that I want to bring to your attention is DaDa. Now, DaDa, when we start talking about juxtaposition, used that very effectively. As a matter of fact, one of the techniques that they used the juxtaposition in was collaging. And this would be a characteristic of the DaDa art period. You can see Hannah Hawk's collage on page 413. I'll say a little more about collage in just a second, but at the top of page 413, there's a sculpture by Man Ray, and that's actually an iron with tacks glued to the bottom. Once again, juxtaposition. What DaDa artists were trying to do, and the statement best that describes it, is that it's useless to create beauty in a world that could destroy itself. The DaDa art movement lasted 7 years. It was from 1918 to 1925. It was right in between World War I and World War II. And at that time, we just getting to the end of World War One, and everything just looked crazy. There were wars going on for no bigger reasons than just maybe a boundary or a border that's a few feet the wrong direction, and millions of people were killed. Matter of fact, during the World War One, they were starting to develop mechanized weapons, so we were able to kill more. And 10 million people were killed. Twice as many were injured during World War One. And the artist looked around and said, "This is insane. This doesn't make sense. And there's no reason for me to try to take art seriously if you guys are going to be as crazy as you are." So this is when, I can't remember, that Marcel Duchamp is in here on page 412. His defacing of the Mona Lisa, it was actually a postcard that was sent to a museum. He put a mustache on her, and at the bottom he put LH0OOQ. And if you say that in French, those individual words, it actually becomes a slur. And it means she has a big butt. So Marcel Duchamp was one of those that was out there pushing it. Matter of fact, and like I said, I don't see it in the book, but Marcel Duchamp is the one that during this time, he took a urinal off the wall, signed it, Armut, M-U-T-T, which is not his name, but that was what he used as his moniker for this particular work of art, and the date. And he took it to a museum and said, "Okay, here's my work of art." And they're like, "Yeah, that's not a work of art. That's a urinal." And he's like, "I'm an artist. I'm giving this to you. I say it's a work of art. And the way things are today, it's as much a work of art as anything else. That's how much sense the world makes right now." And so he was pretty adamant about that. But the way that the Dada artists, so the way that you describe them, is that art is not an end in itself, but an opportunity for true perception and criticism of the times that they lived in. So that's part of the reason that Dada lasted for such a short amount of time, because it was there to make a point, make a statement, advocate for people to see how crazy the world was, and it wasn't necessarily to create fine art. So the montage, the collage, as I said, the thing that makes a collage, and this is going to be our exercise this week actually, is you guys are going to make a collage. And I really like this exercise because it illustrates how difficult it is to make a collage. And because you think, oh, my little brother or sister does that in kindergarten. Yes, they do. But what the artists were doing with collaging during the Dada movement and also into the pop art is a little more difficult and a little more complex and complicated. So the reason that the artists are using collage is because they're using recognizable, iconic images and symbols that people recognize. And just using images, they're creating this narrative, this argument, this comment on the world. And by using socially recognizable symbols and iconic images, then you can look at it and you can see what the message is. And then to make the deeper message, that's where they use the juxtaposition to bring this symbol that means one thing and this symbol that means another, put them together, and then all of a sudden you have an additional meaning. So for instance, on the Hannah Hawk image on page 413, you have these two gentlemen. We don't recognize who they are necessarily because it's not during our time. But putting a gun through the guy's head is commenting on him, maybe his attention, what he's thinking about, what's important to him. And there's all these different images that when they come together create this bigger narrative. So artists of Dada time period were Marcel Duchamp, Hannah Hawk, Man Ray. The iron that I showed you was a Man Ray sculpture. And also have Raoul Hausmann, who was did collaging. And so that's Dada. The third art period that we're going to talk about is pop art. And pop art was from 1960, and I'm jumping a little bit just because these three art periods kind of lead into the exercise that we're going to do this week. Pop art was from 1960 to 1970. And the statement for this is the idea is more important than the work of art itself. Kind of very similar to the Dada art period where they were using the art to make a point, to make a statement about the world, and not so much as a final work of art that you're hanging on your wall. If you look on page 444, you have actually quite a few images from Popart. The primary ones that I see on these two pages, 444 and 445, is the collaging once again. And this the Popart artists use these quite effectively to try to capture the zeitgeist of the time, the thinking, and make a point, a statement. You get this whole narrative just by looking at images, not by words, not by writing, but by just looking at the images that they've created. At the bottom, you have Rosenquist, who actually painted his collage. They're not images, they're paintings of images that are put together to create a collage. Richard Hamilton, at the top of page 445, took images from magazines, newspapers, put them together to create his collage. Another artist of this time, which really reflects the time period really well, is Andy Warhol. And you can see Warhol's image on 446, page 446. And there's a couple things that are going on that really represents Warhol well. First, Warhol was exploring the idea of materialism and consumerism and how that reflect the world that we lived in at that time. He also spent a lot of time thinking about how we objectify the famous people in our life, the iconic people, the entertainers. And so, for instance, this diptych of Marilyn diptych that he created, he's talking about Marilyn Monroe, how we have an idea of who she is, but we never really knew her. As Marilyn Monroe at one time was probably the most recognizable figure in the world, and but she would describe herself as very lonely, and that's because people would objectify her and feel like they knew who she was from images, photographs, movies that she made, but it might not reflect her whatsoever. Warhol also really explored the idea of materialism and consumerism, as I said, where he, like one of his favorite medium was silk screening. He would create these images that he would silk screen, and by silk screening, you can produce many copies of one image, and so all of a sudden it's not this original, it's not this hand-painted original that people highly regarded as fine art. And Warhol would create these mass-produced relics, paintings, images, and say they're fine art. They're just a series. And so it really started messing with people's idea of what fine art was, what the definition of fine art was. Warhol called his studio the factory, playing against this. The characteristics of the time were primary colors, bold colors, collage, repetition, explore mass production process for fine art. Warhol was all in the middle of this. There was another artist, Roy Lichtenstein, who actually on page 447 is a great example where his process is he's trying to replicate what comics look like, the Sunday comic strips, because back in the day, the newspapers were black and white, but on Sunday, they would print the comic strips in color, so people really looked forward to that. And Lichtenstein pulled one of that look and feel out and created his own series where he would write some statement next to an image of, maybe in this case it's drowning girl. And one of his processes is something called a bin day dot. And that's where he created this look that was similar to the comic strips by just placing dots on the canvas and they don't touch. If we remember back earlier, there was an artist that we were talking about. I'm going blank at the moment. Let's see. Who am I trying to pull up in the moment? George Seurat. If you think about his painting, where he used the dots side by side to create the scene on the side of the river. And the Ben-Day dots are very similar to this. Oh, okay, and on page 449, Klaus Oldenburg is another artist during Surrealist time. He did a lot of sculptures. So, Jasper Johns, another artist, Rosenquist, Hamilton, Lichtenstein, Jasper Johns. These are all artists that represent the pop art time. So, with all that said, here's what I would like you to do. It's the collage exercise. Now, let me tell you, many of you will not get the grade that you think you're going to get because you're going to do this beautiful collage. It's going to be wonderful, but I'm not going to know what your commentary is. And that's the hard part. To get images that represent something, that's relatively easy. But to create a message and have those images strongly convey a message, that's where the challenge comes in. So what you're going to do is you're going to identify a social issue, something that's important to you. And it can be anything at all. Mine is I hate people driving the speed limit in the left-hand lane. It's like, if you want to drive the speed limit, awesome, go for it. But don't drive in the left-hand lane because that's the lane that I'm driving 180 miles an hour in, and you're getting in my way. And I got to drive up on the sidewalk, and it's just bad. So that's my social issue. So I would write that down. I'd write a paragraph that describes what my issue is and how I see it, and just really a strong commentary about that. And then you're going to create a collage using, you can use digital images, photographs, what you cut out of magazine, newspaper, and you're going to create this collage that makes this point, that frames it first so we can see it, and then tells us what your opinion is. So this is where you might use symbols such as the slash sign means no, don't do this. And you can use words because words by themselves can be symbols, but you can't string together more than two words together to create a sentence where someone can read it, because what we're doing is we're using images to create your point. As a matter of fact, if you have strung together words that create a sentence that describes what you're trying, what your point is, what your message is, you will not get the grade. You just create a collage, combine images, utilizing symbols, icons, words, position, placement, and juxtaposition to create a collage which expresses your message. No more than two words can be strung together and forming a sentence within the collage. Single words or letters or symbols. So that's everything I just said. And then along with your collage, include that one paragraph which describes what we should be seeing with the collage. Now here's the deal. This is how you're graded. If your message is clearly conveyed and I know what your position is, you get an A. Even if you have a very nice collage, but I don't have an idea what your message is, then you'll get a B. And if you do anything, I always give a C. But that's pretty much the rubric for this grading. You can submit it you can create it digitally. You can create it on paper with cut out prints and take a picture of it and submit it as a JPEG. Actually, what's best is if you don't submit it as a JPEG, take a picture of it, put it in a Word document, and then turn that into PDF. That's my preference. That's always the easiest thing to do. But any way that you can capture it and pull it together and submit it to me, that's fine. Okay, so collage, 3 art periods is Surrealism, DaDa, and Pop Art. You have your quiz, number 4 quiz, and that's all we're going to do. Oh, and by the way, happy Thanksgiving. I hope you guys have a nice holiday. Because of the closing of the school, instead of your deadline being Sunday, you got till Monday, right? Not a big deal, but it's just something that gives you a little bit of extra time. So do a great job. I look forward to seeing what you guys submit. Have fun with this, and see you next time.